Hey guys, welcome to Gen Z Codes. This is the second part for the HTML styling tutorials. So this time we're going to learn about CSS. So CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. Now CSS actually saves a lot of work. It can control the layout of multiple web pages all at once. So Cascading Style Sheets, or CSS for short, is used to format the layout of a web page. With CSS, you can control the color, font, the size of the text, the spacing between elements, how elements are positioned and laid out, what background images or background colors are to be used, different displays for different devices and screen sizes, and so much more. So CSS can be added to HTML documents in three ways. The first way is inline, which is by using the style attribute inside the HTML elements like we just learned. The next way that we have is internal. So you can actually use a style element in the head section and create and use CSS in that sense. And the third way to do that is external, and external CSS is when you use a link element to link to an external CSS file. So we're not actually going to be experimenting with external CSS just yet, but I'll just tell you a little bit about it. So external CSS files contain all of the information about the colors, font size, and basically the overall layout of the web page. And it's pretty efficient because if you want 2 or 3 web pages to look the same, then you can always incorporate an external CSS file, and it's very efficient to do that. So external CSS files are often used by a lot of programmers. So now what we're going to do, since we've already learned about inline CSS, we are going to learn about internal CSS. So an internal CSS is used to define a style for a single HTML page. Now an internal CSS is defined in the head section of an HTML page. So over here. So I don't know if you've seen my first video, but in that video I told you that one of the main things that you can actually do with the head is you usually just put a title like this. So you just put title, and over here you just put whatever title is. So for now I'm just going to call it CSS, right? CSS1 rather. And basically that's the main thing that you use the head for. But actually you can also use the head for CSS, right? And CSS, and that's what a lot of people use the head for, right? It's to add the style element so that you can define the overall layout of your web page. So this is an example that sets the color, and that sets the font, and that sets the font size for the body, the heading, and the paragraph. So as you can see over here, I've just said for the color, for the background color of the body, I've set it to cornflower blue. Then for the heading, I've set the color, the font color, to red. I've set the font family to Verdana, and I've set the font size to 300%. Then I have set the paragraph style to color to dark violet. Then I have the font family, which is career, and font size, which is 150%. Now you might notice that a lot of this, like whatever we've done here, is very, very similar to the inline CSS. So I'll explain to you exactly what the difference is. So if you remember, in the inline CSS, it was specific to a certain element, right? So if I had like H1, over here I had said style, and then whatever I had, right? So over here, this is where I usually would put my style elements. This is where I would put my properties. And that's basically what the inline CSS is. Now, what the difference is between this and this is that over here, I am setting a generic layout for the entire thing. So for all the H1s in the code that I'm about to write, so let's say I have another H1, right? And I'm going to say, over here, I'm just going to say heading 2, right? So for all of these, so for both of these rather, it's going to follow the same style. But if I hadn't put this, right, if I didn't use this, and instead I'd use the inline CSS, then whatever style I've put inside this, it's only going to be applicable for that particular element. So whatever style I've set for this will not be applicable for this then. It'll only be applicable for that. And this is useful a lot of times. This is quite useful actually in case you want each paragraph to have a different style or each heading to have a different style, right? It's pretty useful. But a lot of times, if you just want to have a generic layout throughout the web page, then this is a much more efficient way to do this instead of just constantly having this, like for whichever heading you have, for constantly having the background, for having the color, font, family, and everything, and having all the style properties written over and over again. You can just do it like this, and it'll be quite efficient, right? So, this is actually one way of doing this. Now, there's a second way of doing this internal CSS, right? And it's like this. All right. So let me actually explain to you. Whatever the output is, it's going to be the same, and you'll see this when we open up the web page. But basically, there's almost no difference between this, right? So here, the only thing that we're doing is it's just a syntaxing in the format of how we've written it over here that actually changes. Everything else remains the same. Because actually, if you can look at this, it just goes like this, right? It's the same thing, except I've just added more lines. And the reason that I've done this is because it actually is in keeping with the next thing that we're actually going to talk about, which is classes. But basically, this is just a more organized way of doing the same thing. And yeah, you can choose to do it either way. You can either choose to have it all in a single line, or you can just put it like this, right, where you have it on separate lines. Often I find that this is a little bit easier and it's more organized, which is why I prefer this format and this layout. But you can go ahead and choose this one also if you're more comfortable with it. But one thing to remember is that in the inline CSS, if you remember, we actually had speech marks and quotations around each of the properties and values. But while doing it this way, we do not have those quotation marks. Remember that, right? Whichever way you choose to do it, in internal CSS, we do not use the quotation marks. We only use it in inline CSS. Alright, so now that we've cleared that up, I just want to talk to you about two last elements that we haven't done yet, and that is border and the padding elements. So the CSS border property defines a border around an HTML element. So it's almost like a box that'll form around your paragraph or your heading, whichever one you decide to keep it. Right now we've decided it to be your paragraph, which is why there's just going to be like a border almost around your paragraph that we are making now. And we also have something called a padding. Now, what the padding is it determines the distance between your text and the border. So let's say I don't want the border to be like right there, like touching the text as much, you know. I want it to be much further away, and I wanted there to be like a bigger box or a bigger border with more with more space between the text and the border. In that case, I could set the padding to much higher, and the unit for this is px. So actually now let's go ahead and let's look at the web page, and then hopefully you'll understand both these elements a bit better, and you'll also see what I meant when I was talking about the CSS elements and the way that you can actually write it down. Alright, so this is my web page. Well, actually these are my web pages. If you recall, I had made two different documents, which had very similar code. The only difference was that in one, I had put the padding and border and layout elements, while in this one, I did not do that, right? And what I just wanted to show you was that regardless of how you space it, like on the document itself, and regardless of how you actually format it on the document itself, as long as you're actually doing the style element and you have the CSS internal layout, it's gonna look the same in that, right? And there's actually not that much difference. Actually, there's no difference at all. So as you can see, these are my two web pages. So the first thing, the CSS thing that I had said was about the heading, right? And I had said that the heading should be Verdana and it should be red. You can rewind the video and go ahead and look at the code, and that's what it said, right? And this is exactly what's happened over here and over here as well. I'd also said that the background color should be set to cornflower blue, and that's exactly what happened. The next thing was I had my paragraph, and I had said that it should be deep dark violet, and that's the color of the paragraph. Now, the next thing on this document, which is why it shows up on this web page, on this document what I had said was that I want the paragraph to have a border around it, right? And that's why there's this red border. I had said the color of the border to be red, and that's why it's red in color. Now, the next thing that we were talking about actually just now was the padding. So this distance between the text and the border, that is called the padding. Now, I can increase it by increasing the value of the padding, or I can even decrease it and make it closer to the text right now. It could go up and it could be much closer to the text, and this distance would also decrease if I wanted it to, but actually right now I just wanted to keep it the same, and so that's why the padding is such. So now let's go ahead and let's talk about a new concept, which is a class. Let's learn about that. Okay, so now let's talk about classes and the class attribute on HTML. So the HTML class attribute is used to specify a class for an HTML element. Now, multiple HTML elements can share the same class. So the class attribute is often used to point to a class name in a style sheet. It can also be used by a JavaScript to access and manipulate elements with a specific class name. So we actually use the division or the div elements with a class attribute. So actually here's an example that I've created. So as you can see, the class of name that I've given over here is cuisines, right? And so this is, the class over here is kind of like a category. So I'm specifying a category over here that is now called cuisines. Now, whichever, let's say I want one whole part of my web page to follow the same category, regardless of whether it's a heading, a paragraph, or anything else, right? I want that entire section to follow a certain class. Then I would say class is equal to cuisine. So I've described a certain category with a particular or a specific layout, and I've said that that part should follow this same layout, right? It should follow this general layout. And I've named the class cuisines, right? So here, when I'm calling the cuisines category or the cuisines class, I'm saying class is equal to cuisines in speech marks, all right? So here I've listed down whatever like I want to include in that particular section. And then here I have a second section, and this is also going to follow the class cuisine. And then the third section, again, this is also going to follow the class cuisine, right? Now, let's say I had something over here, right? Like H1, and let's just say this is going to be cuisines, right? So I have a heading that, I have a heading over here, right? But because I haven't said that the class is equal to cuisines, this is going to be a regular or normal heading. I haven't set a particular style for it, and I haven't actually said which category it belongs to, which is why it's just going to come up like a plain black, bold kind of effect that it usually does with headings. And this is okay because this is what I want. I want the rest of it to be split into 3 different sections, and I want each of those sections to follow the same layout. And what the layout is that the background color of that specific section should be light pink. The color of the font and the text should be blue. The border over there should be solid lime, and it should be 2px, right? So the border of the entire thing. Then the margin should be 20px, and the padding, so we've already discussed this, the padding should be about 20px, right? And this is how I want my section to look. I want it to follow the same layout. Now, I'm going to show you the web page so that you understand this a little bit better, and then we're going to compare the code with the web page. Alright, so here I have the web page, and over here I have my HTML document. So as you can see, over here I have 3 different sections, or 3 different divisions, right? what this div part stands for, a division. So here I've created a separate division, I've created a second division, and here's my third division, right? So here, as you can see, I have 3 divisions: the first division, second division, and third division. The first division is called has the heading, which is Indian, second has Thai, and the third has Mexican, right? Now, the layout of each of them is the same. Each of them have the same background color, as mentioned over here. Each of them have the same font color, or the text color, which is blue. Then each of them has the same border, which is 2px, and it's lime in color. Then each of them have the same margin, and they have the same padding as well. The distance from the text to the border is the same, right? And so that's exactly what this is done. But now if you look at this cuisines part, right, my heading over here, it is just plain, and it doesn't have this sort of a category. It doesn't have this sort of layout. Why? Because we haven't assigned it a class. We haven't even said anything about its style. We haven't done anything for its internal or inline style, which is why this is just regular, right? But the rest of these, because I've given them the same class, because I've said that all 3 of these divisions have to follow the same class, which means they have to have the same layout, and that's why the browser on my web page, now I have 3 divisions, and each of them have the same layout, as you can see right here. So the last thing that I just wanted to tell you about is that classes don't necessarily have to be used for particular divisions, right? They can also just be used for specific categories. Like, let's say I wanted to create a class that said, I wanted to create a class for maybe a specific heading or something, right? So I said dot heading, right? And over here, let's say, over here, maybe I can say like, wait, actually, let's get that back, right? And over here, I can say dot heading, and I can say maybe background color, and perhaps we can go ahead and say like red or something, right? Then my color, so the text color, I can say white. Then over here, I can go ahead and maybe put a border, which is about like 2px, and we can probably say, I don't know, how about like solid blue, right? So this is how it would look, and then let's put maybe a padding of, let's say, 30px this time. Px, right? So now I'm just going to save this, and I'm going to reload this page. Sec. Oh, wait, oops, we forgetting to put it here, right? So, and then here I would say class is equal to, and I would say heading. All right. Now we can go ahead and save this and reload this page. And as you can see over here, the cuisines now has a style of its own, and because it's following a different class, and the class has the background color is red, color is white, and then solid blue, and then 30px or whatever. So basically the main purpose of this class is to make your styling much more efficient. So if you wanted a heading, a paragraph, and a, I don't know, maybe list, if you wanted all 3 of them to follow the same style, but they were all scattered around your web page and they were in different locations, what you could do is you could use this class, you could use a class and you could call it for each of them. Then each of them would have the same type of style, right? And that's how this sort of works, right? You can use these classes for styling different elements, and it would make it much easier, right? And that's what CSS kind of aims to do, especially the internal and external CSS. They just make your coding and styling much more efficient and quite easy as compared to what it would be if you didn't have any sort of categories or general layouts, right? So that's about it for this video. Thank you for watching. I hope you understood what I explained to you in this video and the concepts like CSS and styling. If you have any questions or doubts, don't hesitate to leave a comment below, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Thank you for watching. Happy coding!